Wars are won by nations that make fewer catastrophic mistakes than their enemies. In the Second World War, brilliant tactical victories collapsed under the weight of strategic incompetence. Entire armies vanished because leaders refused to acknowledge reality. Industrial superpowers entered conflicts they could never win because pride overtook calculation. And in some cases, single orders spoken in anger guaranteed defeat years before the final surrender. Germany possessed some of the finest military minds of the 20th century. Japan demonstrated tactical audacity that stunned the world. Yet both nations committed blunders so profound that historians still struggle to comprehend the reasoning behind them. These were not small miscalculations. These were decisions that redirected the entire trajectory of human history. 5 mistakes stand above all others, not because they were merely failures, but because each one guaranteed the destruction of the nation that made it. Before we go deeper into how these decisions changed the war forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The first blunder began with a declaration that shocked even Hitler's closest advisors. On December 11, 1941, 4 days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler stood before the Reichstag and declared war on the United States of America. He was not required to do so. The tripartite pact between Germany, Italy, and Japan was a defensive alliance. It obligated signatories to support each other only if one of them was attacked. Japan had launched the offensive at Pearl Harbor. Germany owed Japan nothing. Yet Hitler volunteered Germany into a war against a nation with 8 times the industrial capacity of the Third Reich. He did so without consulting his military staff. He did so without any strategic plan for how Germany could possibly defeat an enemy 3,000 miles across an ocean. He did so in the middle of a desperate struggle on the Eastern Front, where his armies were already bleeding to death in the snow outside Moscow. The reasoning behind this decision has been analyzed for 8 decades. Some historians argue Hitler believed America would declare war on Germany anyway and wanted to seize the initiative. Others suggest he thought Japan's aggression would distract American resources from Europe. A few claim he simply despised Franklin Roosevelt and acted on impulse. None of these explanations change the fundamental reality. By declaring war on the United States, Hitler transformed a European conflict into a genuinely global war that Germany could not win. America's industrial base was untouched by bombing. Its population exceeded 80 million. Its factories could produce tanks, aircraft, and munitions at rates that made German production look pitiful by comparison. Before Hitler's declaration, isolationist sentiment in America ran strong. Many citizens opposed entering another European war. Congress remained divided on the issue. Hitler's declaration eliminated all debate. Within hours, the United States Congress voted to declare war on Germany with near unanimity. The nation that had been reluctant to fight now possessed total political will to crush the Third Reich. From that moment forward, Germany faced enemies on 3 fronts with a fraction of the resources needed to fight them. American bombers would eventually turn German cities into ash. American tanks would break through the Atlantic Wall. American factories would supply Britain and the Soviet Union with the material to continue fighting even after devastating losses. Hitler's declaration of war on America ranks as possibly the single worst strategic decision in modern military history, worse even than the disasters that would unfold in the Soviet Union, because it guaranteed that Germany would face the combined industrial might of the world's greatest economic power. No tactical brilliance, no wonder weapons, no willpower could overcome that mathematical reality. The second catastrophic blunder unfolded on a beach in France during the spring of 1940. By May 24th, German armored divisions had achieved what military analysts considered impossible. They had smashed through the Ardennes forest, broken the French defensive line, and trapped the entire British expeditionary force along with substantial French units against the coast near Dunkirk. More than 300,000 Allied soldiers stood cornered with their backs to the English Channel. German panzers sat positioned less than 20 miles from Dunkirk's beaches. The road to complete annihilation of Britain's army lay open. Then Adolf Hitler issued an order that would haunt Germany for the rest of the war. He commanded his panzer divisions to halt. For 3 full days, German armor sat motionless, while British and French troops frantically organized a defensive perimeter. Historians still debate why Hitler issued the halt order. Some claim he wanted to preserve his tanks for the upcoming campaign against the rest of France. Others argue that Hermann Göring convinced Hitler to let the Luftwaffe finish the job from the air. A few suggest Hitler actually hoped to negotiate peace with Britain and saw mercy at Dunkirk as a gesture of goodwill. Whatever the reason, the halt order represented a catastrophic failure of strategic vision. Those 3 days gave the British time to establish defenses, organize evacuation procedures, and mobilize every vessel in southern England capable of floating. Operation Dynamo began on May 26, 1940. Over 9 days, a fleet of destroyers, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, and ferry boats shuttled back and forth across the Channel under constant air attack. When the evacuation concluded on June 4th, more than 338,000 Allied troops had escaped. Britain lost equipment, vehicles, and artillery, but it saved its army. The men who walked off those beaches would form the core of British forces that later fought in North Africa, Italy, and Normandy. The junior officers who survived Dunkirk would become the senior commanders who planned D-Day. Churchill called it a miracle. In truth, it was a catastrophic German blunder. Had Hitler allowed his panzer commanders to push forward on May 24th, the British army would have ceased to exist. Britain would have been nearly defenseless against invasion. The entire course of the war would have shifted. Instead, Germany gave its most dangerous enemy a reprieve it should never have received. The third blunder was not a single decision, but a fundamental miscalculation about logistics, distance, and Russian resolve. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3.5 million soldiers, 3,600 tanks, 2,700 aircraft, and 7,000 artillery pieces smashed across the Soviet border along an 1,800-mile front. The invasion aimed to destroy the Soviet Union in a single campaign season before winter arrived. German planning assumed Soviet forces would collapse within weeks, just as French forces had collapsed the previous year. The plan contained a fatal flaw. It required Germany to conquer a nation 11 times its size, with supply lines stretching thousands of miles across terrain that would turn into impassable mud and then frozen wasteland. The invasion succeeded beyond expectations for the first 4 months. German forces encircled entire Soviet armies, captured millions of prisoners, and advanced hundreds of miles toward Moscow. By December 1941, advance units reached the outskirts of the Soviet capital. German soldiers could see the spires of the Kremlin through their field glasses. Then, the offensive stalled, not because Soviet forces defeated the Wehrmacht in battle, but because German logistics collapsed. Trucks broke down on primitive roads, tanks ran out of fuel, supplies piled up hundreds of miles behind the front lines, while forward units went hungry. The German army had prepared for a short war. It entered a long one with inadequate equipment for Russian winter. Soldiers froze in summer uniforms. Engine oil turned to sludge in temperatures that dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Weapons jammed. Frostbite claimed more casualties than Soviet bullets. Then, on December 5, 1941, the Red Army counterattacked. Fresh divisions from Siberia, equipped and trained for winter warfare, struck German positions along a 200-mile front. The Wehrmacht fell back in chaos. For the first time in the war, German forces retreated in disorder. The myth of German invincibility shattered in the snow outside Moscow. Operation Barbarossa failed not because Soviet forces were stronger, but because German planners had fundamentally miscalculated the scale of what they were attempting. They had launched an invasion that required defeating an enemy with vastly superior manpower reserves and industrial capacity in a single campaign season. When that campaign failed to achieve victory before winter, Germany found itself locked in exactly the kind of protracted war of attrition it could not win. Every mile advanced meant longer supply lines. Every division committed meant fewer reserves. Every casualty meant irreplaceable losses Germany lacked the population to absorb. Barbarossa transformed World War II from a series of German victories into a grinding war that would eventually consume the Third Reich. The fourth catastrophic mistake occurred not at the beginning of a campaign, but at the moment when retreat could have saved an entire army. By November 1942, the German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus had fought its way into Stalingrad. The battle for the city had devolved into brutal house-to-house combat that consumed men and material at horrifying rates. Then, on November 19th, Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that smashed through weak Romanian positions on the flanks of the German advance. Within 4 days, Soviet pincers met west of Stalingrad. The trap closed. More than 250,000 German and Romanian soldiers found themselves encircled in a pocket roughly 30 miles across. Military logic dictated immediate breakout. The Sixth Army possessed enough fuel and ammunition for one desperate push to escape the encirclement. General Paulus radioed Hitler for permission to withdraw. Hitler refused. He ordered Paulus to hold Stalingrad at all costs. Hermann Göring promised the Luftwaffe could supply the pocket by air. The promise was a fantasy. Supplying an army of that size required 500 tons of material per day. The Luftwaffe never delivered more than 120 tons in a single day. Most days brought far less. Soviet anti-aircraft guns and fighters tore apart German transport planes by the dozens. Inside the pocket, soldiers starved. Horses were slaughtered and eaten. Then, the horses ran out. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Frostbite and disease killed thousands. German forces continued to fight with diminishing strength, while Soviet forces tightened the noose. In January 1943, the Soviets offered surrender terms. Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal and reminded him that no German field marshal had ever surrendered. The implication was clear: Paulus should take his own life rather than capitulate. On January 31, 1943, Paulus surrendered anyway. 91,000 German soldiers went into Soviet captivity. Only 5,000 would ever see Germany again. The destruction of the Sixth Army at Stalingrad represented the single largest disaster in German military history. But the true magnitude of the blunder was not the loss of one army. It was that the entire catastrophe could have been avoided. Had Hitler authorized a breakout in late November, when the encirclement was still fresh, the Sixth Army might have escaped with heavy losses, but intact. Instead, Hitler's pathological refusal to authorize retreat transformed a dangerous situation into total annihilation. This pattern would repeat throughout the rest of the war. German forces forbidden to retreat, ground down in hopeless positions, destroyed when they could have withdrawn to fight another day. The no-retreat policy did not demonstrate strength. It guaranteed the systematic destruction of Germany's best remaining combat units. The fifth blunder belongs not to Germany, but to Japan, and it occurred on a Sunday morning that transformed the war. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft struck the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The attack achieved tactical surprise. It sank or damaged 8 battleships, destroyed nearly 200 aircraft, and killed more than 2,000 American servicemen. Japanese losses amounted to 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines. By every tactical measure, the raid was a stunning success. By every strategic measure, It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Japan's leadership believed a decisive blow against American naval power would shock the United States into negotiating a settlement that recognized Japanese dominance in the Pacific. They assumed America lacked the will to fight a long war across thousands of miles of ocean. They were catastrophically wrong. The attack on Pearl Harbor accomplished the one thing Japan needed to avoid. It united American public opinion behind total war. Before Pearl Harbor, America was divided. Isolationist sentiment ran strong. Many citizens opposed involvement in foreign conflicts. Congress debated, delayed, and divided over intervention. Pearl Harbor ended all debate. The attack transformed American psychology overnight. The nation that had been reluctant to fight became determined to destroy Japan completely. Factories that had been producing consumer goods converted to war production with stunning speed. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels began launching aircraft carriers at a rate Japan could not match. Within 2 years of Pearl Harbor, American industrial output exceeded the combined production of all Axis powers. Japan had awakened a giant that possessed 10 times its industrial capacity and 20 times its oil production. Japanese planners knew this. They attacked anyway, gambling that American will would break before American industry could mobilize. The gamble failed. America did not seek negotiated peace. It pursued total victory. The war Japan started at Pearl Harbor ended with atomic fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Every carrier lost at Midway, every soldier dead on Pacific Islands, every city burned by B-29 bombers, all of it traced back to the decision to strike Pearl Harbor. Japan's leadership made the classical error of authoritarian regimes. They projected their own cultural values onto an enemy they did not understand. They assumed Americans were weak because they were democratic, divided because they were free, and unwilling to sacrifice because they were prosperous. They discovered that free nations fight with a ferocity that dictatorships cannot comprehend when their populations unite behind a just cause. Pearl Harbor gave America that cause. The attack transformed a reluctant democracy into an instrument of total war. From that moment forward, Japan's defeat was inevitable. The question was never whether Japan would lose, only how many millions would die before Japanese leaders accepted reality. These 5 blunders share common threads. Each represented a fundamental failure to understand strategic reality. Each prioritized short-term tactical gains over long-term strategic consequences. Each ignored logistics, industrial capacity, and mathematical probability in favor of willpower and aggression. Hitler's declaration of war on America, his halt order at Dunkirk, his no-retreat policy at Stalingrad, and Germany's entire invasion of the Soviet Union all reflected a worldview that believed determination could overcome material disadvantage. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor reflected the same delusion. These were not mere mistakes. They were failures of strategic imagination so profound that they guaranteed the destruction of the nations that made them. Brilliant generals cannot overcome incompetent grand strategy. Tactical excellence cannot compensate for strategic stupidity, and no amount of soldier courage can win wars when leadership makes decisions that make defeat mathematically inevitable. The Second World War was not won by the side that made no mistakes. It was won by the side that made fewer, catastrophic ones. The Allies certainly committed blunders: Operation Market Garden, the Dieppe raid, the decision to demand unconditional surrender. But none of Allied mistakes approached the magnitude of these 5 disasters. None of them guaranteed Allied defeat the way these 5 blunders guaranteed Axis defeat. The lesson from these failures remains relevant 8 decades later. Wars are decided not on battlefields, but in the minds of leaders who must understand the fundamental strategic realities they face. Leaders who ignore logistics, misunderstand enemy psychology, refuse to acknowledge mathematics, or believe willpower can overcome industrial capacity will lead their nations to ruin no matter how bravely their soldiers fight. The 5 worst blunders of World War II were not failures of courage. They were failures of strategic reason, and they cost millions of lives that never should have been lost. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.